Last year, 20th Century Pictures released Alien Romulus, the 7th film in the Alien franchise. After Ridley Scott's 2 divisive prequel films, this was an attempt to bring the series back to basics. It had a classic Alien plot. A group of working-class people are stuck on board a spaceship with a bunch of face-huggers and xenomorphs. It did classic Alien stuff. It looked like classic Alien movies. It had a brunette female protagonist who survived to the end. And it was the most well-received Alien movie in 40 years. It made more than 4 times its budget and received largely positive reviews. The movie was a genuine hit, and a sequel was immediately announced. And while I did not have a bad time watching Alien Romulus, it depressed me. The Alien franchise had always been notable for how different each movie was. Each time there was a different director, a different setting, a different look, and different feel. They would continue the story of Ellen Ripley and her encounters with a terrifying alien species, but beyond that, each one did wildly different things. There was a sci-fi slasher, then a marine action movie, then a morose prison drama, and finally, space basketball. Regardless of your feelings about individual installments, it's impossible to deny the series' ambitions. Each one moved the story forward, took huge risks, and tried new things. The series never repeated itself. Even when original director Ridley Scott returned to the franchise, it wasn't to make a traditional legacy sequel. It was for prequel films that were less interested in the xenomorph and more interested in humans searching for meaning in the universe and discovering their god is basically, what if Vin Diesel was made out of Gatorade Frost? Scott had additional films planned that would continue the story of the android David and the wacky shenanigans he got up to out in space. But after the second film, Covenant, underperformed commercially, the studio put those plans on hold. And then when that studio was acquired by Disney, the franchise went in a different direction, or rather, a familiar direction. With Romulus and the recent TV series Alien Earth, the franchise has now arrived exactly where Star Wars has been for years. Like Star Wars, it's producing new installments, but instead of moving forward, it is picking points back within the timeline of the earlier films to tell its stories. And for the first time in the franchise's history, not counting the 2 AVP movies, it's not doing anything new. Romulus has no unique hook or setting, just a repeat of ones from earlier films. The aesthetic and the tone are based on the first film. It even quotes famous lines from earlier installments.
Get away from her. You bitch.
And uses visual effects to resurrect old characters whose actors have passed away. It is very deliberately not doing anything different or risky. It's the only Alien film without a distinct identity or authorial voice. It's replaying the greatest hits of the earlier films, just not as well. In a piece of incredible accidental meta-commentary, the plot of Romulus begins with the discovery of the wreckage of the Nostromo, the ship from the first film that has an alien life form on board. So to restate that, the story is literally made from the leftover trash of the first film. And so watching Romulus, I had the terrible thought of, oh no. They're just gonna stay here and do this forever now, aren't they? So like, is the next movie gonna be about a new crew finding the wreckage of the Romulus one? Are we just gonna stay here and do this forever, over and over again? Like, for most of the past decade, Star Wars has largely been telling stories within the same 60-year period in the series' timeline, answering questions that no one ever really had. Like, what did Obi-Wan Kenobi do when he was living on Tatooine? Or, how did Han Solo get the Millennium Falcon? Ignoring the important questions like, what do you think Jabba the Hutt's skin feels like? And now, Alien is here answering questions like, what happened to the pieces of the ship after it self-destructed? I personally do not care. And with these and other franchises, as much as I've always considered myself a fan of them, as much as I've enjoyed some of the installments made in the past 10 years, I find myself wondering if this is all we're going to get forever. Maybe we should just let them end. Hello, I'm Patrick Willems, and welcome back to the show. Now, this is going to be a smaller, quieter episode than the last few. Those were honestly exhausting to make. Emma and Nobbles are already off for Thanksgiving, and I've only got a couple hours to shoot this before I have to catch a train upstate. So, 2 bits of housekeeping before we jump into our topic today. Number 1. The plush Nobbleses are finally in stock and shipping right now. Christmas is coming up, so I don't know, if you know a kid who has never watched this show before, buy them a plush Nobbles and watch them go, what the hell is this thing? And number 2, I usually wear sweaters from one of our beloved sweater sponsors. Also, we're always looking for more. But today, we have something different and even more special. Right now, I am wearing a sweater hand knit by Ellen Butters, a viewer who watched our episode on sweaters and movies and reached out to ask if she could knit me a custom sweater. Obviously, I said yes, and here it is. I think it looks amazing, it fits perfectly, it's so comfortable. I really love it. This is probably the best thing to come out of these videos since the time I got invited to the Mission Impossible premiere and met Tom Cruise. Ellen does not have a store, so sorry, but you can't buy one of these. I just wanna say, Ellen, thank you so much. But anyway, the reason we are here today, legacy sequels. Well, sort of. We just made 2 episodes about legacy sequels. Stories that appeared to be definitively over, but returned decades later to say, nope. And as much as plenty of sequels justify their existence by saying something new about the characters or just being so fucking kick-ass that you really can't deny them, what we've seen over and over are series continuing far past their logical endpoints. When there's no more story to tell, often after the original actors and characters have moved on, and yet they keep going on in a hollow endeavor to maintain the brand. And as everything seems to keep going on forever, it's depriving us of arguably the most important part of storytelling: endings. In 2018, Amanda Hess wrote a piece for the New York Times titled "The End of Endings," about our modern pop culture's refusal to let anything conclude, which has only gotten worse in the last 7 years. Every franchise returns for a legacy sequel or expands into a never-ending cinematic universe. Every TV show gets a decades-later reboot. Our social media platforms are designed to algorithmically deliver us a never-ending feed of content based largely on what we've previously consumed. We are held in a perpetual state of anticipation for what's next, never allowed to sit and reflect on what has passed. And somehow, in all of this, one of the only franchises that has not been revived is the never-ending story. Like, what are we doing here? In the piece, Hess writes, "Didn't endings used to mean something? They imbued everything that came before them with significance, and then they gave us the space to reflect on it all. More than that, they made us feel alive. The story ended, but we did not. This had been true at least since the novel supplanted the oral tradition. In his essay, The Storyteller, Walter Benjamin wrote that the novelist invites the reader to a divinatory realization of the meaning of life by writing finis. He continued, "What draws the reader to the novel is the hope of warming his shivering life with a death he reads about. We needed stories to end so we could make sense of them. We needed characters to die so we could make sense of ourselves." Until recently, cinema was not a medium often used to tell serialized stories. In the very early days of cinema, there were actually movie serials, but they were short and produced quickly and cheaply. Basically, they were a TV show released weekly in movie theaters. But once television arrived, it made those irrelevant. And while there were movie sequels back then, they were episodic and light on continuity, like the Thin Man movies, or the Hope Crosby Road to movies, or Francis the Talking Mule, a franchise with, I kid you not, 7 installments.
Hey, they're raising taxes again.
No one was attempting overarching cinematic sagas back then. You could watch any random one of these movies and understand it just fine. Side note, I was just reading about the Francis the Talking Mule franchise, and I swear to God, it includes actual movies called Francis Goes to West Point, Francis in the Navy, and Francis in the Haunted House. What happened to this country? Anyway, the one notable exception back in the old days was the original Planet of the Apes series. Beginning in 1968 and continuing with 4 sequels over the next 5 years, each one dramatically moved the story forward, assuming that the audience had seen the preceding films. Despite the increasingly low budgets, this series is the closest anything of its era came to the heavily serialized franchises of today. The next major exception, of course, was the original Star Wars trilogy, the success of which inspired the revival of Star Trek, with the cast of the original 1960s TV show returning for a series of 7 movies, essentially doing what they had done on TV, but on a much larger scale. But the true turning point came at the turn of the Willennium. Star Wars returned for another trilogy, telling one big story across 3 movies that were totally normal and loved by everyone. But the biggest impact came in 2001, with a fantastical doubleheader announcing the advent of 2 huge franchises, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Now, I've brought up this event before, since it really was such a major turning point in modern cinema, and it really kicked off the IP era that we've been living in ever since. But for our conversation today, the important thing was the commitment to multi-part cinematic stories in a way never attempted before. Like, before the first film in either series had been released, the following one was either in production or already filmed. Now, obviously, both of these were enormous era-defining hits, but now, almost 25 years later, cinematic sagas comprised of anywhere from 4 to 24 movies are a normal occurrence. Ironically, as movies became more like TV became more like movies. Production values on shows got so high that the cinematography and visual effects are now usually as good as you'd see in a blockbuster movie, which means that TV shows cost much more to make and take much longer. So instead of a show airing 22 episodes every year, now we're lucky if our parched, thirsty for TV asses get even 10 episodes every 2 years. All of this has often been called the TVification of movies, but I would argue that, especially in the last 15 years, it's really more the comic bookification of movies. Look, enough has been written and said about the impact of the Marvel Cinematic Universe on mainstream cinema. You don't need me to sit here and say for the millionth time, yeah, then everyone tried to make their own cinematic universe as well. But what I actually think is more relevant than the CUs is the larger form of storytelling that Marvel popularized. There had been lots of superhero movies before Iron Man kicked off the MCU. First Superman and Batman movies, and later X-Men and Spider-Man. But they didn't really attempt complex overarching stories through multiple films. They might tease a plot point or a character for the sequel at the end of one movie, like X2 or Spider-Man 2, but they usually just focused on one movie at a time and wrapped the series up after 3 or 4 installments. But that's not how comic books work. Spider-Man has been published continuously since 1962 in what is basically one massive ongoing story that has lasted over 60 years. And unless the comic book industry fully collapses and Marvel stops publishing comics, it will never end. The very nature of mainstream superhero comics from DC and Marvel is that they are designed to run forever. Writers and artists will change countless times, but the ongoing stories of the characters never end. They never get older, and they never die. Well, okay, they do die, but then they come back. And so pre-MCU, whenever these characters had been adapted for film, the storytelling was conformed to cinema. Because movies take much longer and require infinitely more money to make than comics do, and you have to consider that actors aren't little drawings on paper, they age and have other projects and usually can't constantly play the same character for decades. Like, can you imagine if we forced Adam West to stay on as Batman for his whole life? I'm just saying that would have been a very different Nolan trilogy. But Marvel Studios changed all of that. We used to get, like, Tobey Maguire playing Spider-Man in 3 movies. And now we got Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man in 10 movies across 11 years. There were now way more installments, continuity became way more important, and there was always the promise that this was leading somewhere. It was so much closer to the actual ongoing interconnected stories of mainstream superhero comics than cinema had ever seen before. Avengers Endgame, the self-proclaimed conclusion to the Infinity Saga, functions as a season finale to the previous 11 years of movies. Whatever issues I have with that franchise, I think Endgame largely sticks the landing. It felt satisfying and tied up lots of story threads and character arcs. It was something that had never before been attempted on this scale in movies. But remember, this entire franchise had been an adaptation of the ongoing comic books published by Marvel for the previous 60 years. And those comic book stories never end. But while the Marvel Universe is one never-ending story, it's important to note that it's also comprised of countless smaller stories, and those actually do have endings. So if you're not familiar with the way mainstream superhero comics work, there's always a team with a writer and artist who will generally work on a series for a period of time, doing what's called a run. That run can last anywhere from a handful of issues to hundreds, like Chris Claremont's legendary X-Men run that lasted 16 years. While it exists within the larger continuity of the universe and characters, a run will generally read like its own big story. Like sure, at the end, the creative team puts the toys back in the toy box since Batman still needs to keep going with the next team, but that Batman story still gets a conclusion. So when people talk about the MCU and Endgame being an ending, if you're a comic book reader, you know that this was really just the end of a run. The ongoing story continues after it ends. Obviously, Disney and Marvel were never going to let the most successful franchise in film history simply stop. But I think the real mistake they made was not making the next run feel distinct. Kevin Feige should have stepped away there and let someone take over for the next run to bring in a new creative vision. But instead, it largely felt like a story that kept running in place, not knowing it was over. This was the studio that brought comic book storytelling to cinema, but it forgot a major part of how comic book storytelling works. Because yes, you have an ending to the run, but then you need a fresh start with new talent to give audiences a place to jump in. Instead, Marvel Studios just gave existing audiences a place to jump off. And along the way, every other studio and every other franchise tried to replicate this comic book style approach of never-ending stories. Because as Dr. Manhattan once told us, nothing ever ends.
Exalt your fandom, live your fashion, The 2025 Patrick H. Willems collection, The Ordinary Becomes Spectacular. The Cinephile's Mug. Be bold and unafraid to express who you are. Tell the world, I appreciate Val Kilmer more than you. And finally we give you the Nobbles. You too can have a piece of the icon himself. Available now for a limited time.
Well, a few things do. Kinda. So after crunching some numbers and doing my favorite thing, making more spreadsheets, I realized that there are really only 3 reasons that movie franchises come to an end. Number 1, they stop making money. As much as we care primarily about the art here, we can never forget that movies are a business and are primarily designed to make dummy thick stacks of cheddar. Sequels are made because they're reliable. They're simply repeating a formula that has already proven to be successful. So logically, if the movies are making money, keep on making them. Until they stop. Once franchise installments stop being profitable, especially if there's been a decline over multiple installments, studios will usually pull the plug, even when there's been an ongoing story that has not yet been concluded. So apologies to all of the spin-offs that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 set up, because that movie was a critical and commercial disappointment, and so that was it for the series. And that was also it for Garstones, as I like to call Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield's relationship at the time. Okay, reason number 2, a powerful creative lead decides to end it. This is probably the rarest reason, because it means that a single person in a creative role, usually the director or star, has enough power to tell a major studio that their reliable cash cow is going to stop, whether they like it or not. The ultimate recent example is Christopher Nolan deciding to end his Batman series after 3 installments. Obviously, there would go on to be a bunch more Batman movies, but not part of that series, and thus, not quite as successful. Or recently, even though narratively the door is open to return, it looks like Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie made the executive decision to end Mission Impossible. But what happens more often is something like Pirates of the Caribbean, where Gore Verbinski completed the story he set out to tell across 3 installments, but the studio was like, well, whatever, we're gonna keep on making more. And those next movies still made a lot of money, but I don't think anybody likes them. And reason number 3, when the source material runs out. This is the simple one. When a movie franchise faithfully adapts a series of usually books, there is a clear roadmap for how far the story goes. Like there are only 3 Lord of the Rings books, and 7 Harry Potter books, and 3 Hunger Games books, and 4 Twilight books, so once those are adapted, that's it. But let me stop you before you start yelling at your TV. As we know, this doesn't always mean the end, because even when Warner Brothers ran out of Harry Potter books to adapt, they just made a new series set in the same world, until those movies stopped making money, and so they canceled the series before they ever reached their planned ending. The fact is, movies are an odd vehicle for serialized storytelling, which is not to say that it can't work, but the ones that pull it off are very rare. The places where serialized storytelling has always flourished, television, prose, radio, and comic books, are all much cheaper to produce than movies, or at least TV was until recently. They're produced much more quickly, and they have way more installments released on a frequent schedule. Apart from a self-eating Banksy, movies are maybe the most expensive art form there is, usually taking multiple years to produce. Marvel made it work by having several ongoing series that were part of the larger franchise, so like Captain America had his own movie every 2 or 3 years, but then there were enough other vaguely connected movies so there was a new Marvel installment every 6 months or so. Again, much closer to TV than a regular movie franchise. Because of the wait time and cost of each one, movies have to feel more complete than other episodic installments in other mediums. If a film cuts off at the end, announcing the story will conclude in the next film several years later, like Dune Part 1 or Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, that's a pretty big gamble. Because in the film industry, a sequel only gets made if the first one is a commercial success. So planning far ahead is difficult when you don't know how a movie is going to perform. Like that time they made a movie called Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, and then it bombed and the adventure never continued. Or, my favorite example, the Divergent series. They adapted the first 2 books, and then, like every YA series adaptation, they split the final book into 2 films. But part 1 underperformed, and so they just never made part 2. And thus we have a 3-movie series that builds to an ending that never happens. Because cinema wasn't built for this kind of thing. It was made for contained stories that are a couple hours long. But because of the popularity of adaptations and the allure of building across multiple films to a huge finale, people keep forcing it, defibrillating their beloved IP once again and continually ignoring their do not resuscitate form. Look, sequels are just a part of storytelling, as we discussed at length in the last 2 episodes. But there are really 2 different approaches to sequels: the episodic and the saga. Episodic is how most sequels were until the 21st century. That's even how Alien used to be. But now, almost everything wants to be a saga. And when something insists on being a saga, we have to step back and evaluate the entire series as more than just the sum of its parts. What is the larger story being told? Because the more these series drag on and the more installments are added, the less the larger story usually feels like an actual statement and more like a jumbled mess of competing ideas. Like now, 7 movies in. Can you tell me what the story of the Jurassic Park saga is? But right now, there is one movie franchise taking the opposite approach to all the others, going against the grain of 21st century franchise trends. And it's actually Alien's sister series, Predator. From the beginning, Predator always had a looser approach than other franchises. There were no recurring characters, no primary writer or director overseeing multiple installments, and despite John McTiernan's original film being a masterpiece, see our video about it, Predator was never given the same level of prestige and respect as Alien, which sometimes I think could be a good thing. It kind of takes the pressure and expectation off of it. The sequels were very much a mixed bag, but in the past 3 years, the series has transformed. It started with 2022's Prey, director Dan Trachtenberg's extremely cool revival that placed a predator in 1700s North America, where it faced off against a young Comanche woman. It was a totally self-contained movie that simply applied the basic idea of the predator to a new setting with new characters. The movie was a hit with audiences and critics, but instead of doing the natural thing and continuing the story, finding some convoluted way to have Amber Midthunder's Naru team up with Arnold Schwarzenegger's Dutch, Trachtenberg did something totally different. He made 2 more Predator movies, both released this year. The first, Predator Killer of Killers, is an animated anthology film with multiple stories spanning over 1,000 years. And the second, Predator Badlands, which is actually in theaters right now, is a blockbuster action movie set entirely on an alien planet hundreds of years in the future with, for the first time, a predator as the protagonist. So like, Protagator, or Predagonist. Incredibly, none of these movies are sequels to each other. There is no overarching story and no recurring characters. And it's genuinely refreshing to see a movie franchise not care about doing a multi-film saga full of sequel teases and instead opt for standalone stories. But it also feels uniquely cinematic instead of copying TV or comic books. Each film is very different, with totally different protagonists and settings. Lore and continuity don't really matter. There's no homework required here. You don't need to watch any other movies or TV shows to understand what's happening. You could watch any of these movies in any order and be fine and have a great time. They're just set in the same universe, they involve this one alien race called the Yautja and a handful of recurring tropes, and that's it. Badlands is even technically a crossover with the Alien franchise, since it features androids from the Weyland-Yutani Corporation that originated in those movies. But if you've never seen an Alien movie, it doesn't matter. There are no appearances by xenomorphs or any legacy characters, and it's not setting up some future Avengers-style crossover movie. Yes, I am aware of the title of this episode and how I have just praised a franchise that has literally released 2 movies in the last 5 months. Clearly, that shit ain't ending. But unlike Star Wars or Alien, it's not running in place, recycling the greatest hits of the past to diminishing returns. It's not demanding that audiences sign up for another decade-long saga, building to some movie version of a season finale. It's just a collection of movies that happen to be set in the same world, exploring the different things that can be done within this franchise. Each one is doing something new, and even if it's a period piece, is moving the franchise forward. And each movie has an ending, not a setup for a sequel. And yes, even though you could read the end of Badlands as a sequel setup, Trachtenberg has clarified that it's just a fun twist at the end. There is no intention of making a direct sequel. So right now, incredibly, Predator of all things, other than maybe Rian Johnson's Benoit Blanc series, is doing the best job of any franchise at giving us classic episodic sequels. There's a legendary unmade comic book from the late 1980s known as Twilight of the Superheroes. It was to be written by Alan Moore, and all that exists is the proposal he submitted. In it, he writes, "One of the things that prevents superhero stories from ever attaining the status of true modern myths or legends is that they are open-ended. An essential quality of a legend is that the events in it are clearly defined in time. Robin Hood, King Arthur, Davy Crockett, or Sherlock Holmes, you cannot apply it to most comic book characters because, in order to meet the commercial demands of a continuing series, they can never have a resolution. Instead, they find it difficult to embrace any of the changes in life that the passage of time brings about for these very same reasons, making them finally less than fully human, as well as falling far short of true myth. By providing a fitting and effective capstone to the Batman legend, it makes it just that, a legend rather than an endlessly meandering continuity." Moore wanted to give the DC Comics universe an ending. Maybe not a definitive death for each of the superheroes, but a glimpse of their later days. A resolution where this never-ending story can end up. And in that resolution, a chance to say something about what this whole story has meant. The series never ended up happening due to Moore's falling out with DC over the rights to Watchmen, but this idea is something that many people, myself included, have thought about for a long time. Because as much as it's great to get more of the stories and characters you love, as much as I love that the Marvel and DC universes will continue ad infinitum, I also love endings. To quote the intro to Vulture's feature, The 101 Greatest Endings in Movie History, the ending is arguably the most important part of any film. How a filmmaker wants you to feel when the lights go up is often the key to what that picture was really about. The ending is where the character's journey concludes, where their arc becomes complete, where they make their final choice. This is where the storyteller makes their final statement. In a film, it's the final image they leave us with before the credits roll, the final words that are spoken.
I think this just might be my masterpiece.
So at this point, what is the ending to Star Wars? For decades, it was Return of the Jedi, but then we got the sequel trilogy, with Episode 9 promising the true ending to the saga. But then that movie was so universally considered disappointing that Lucasfilm has announced another movie following Rey after the events of The Rise of Skywalker, which, if it actually gets made, will, I guess, be the actual ending to the series? And yes, I recognize the hypocrisy of me in the last episode advocating for Steven Soderbergh's other potential Star Wars ending to be made. I would genuinely love a better ending than the one we got. But you gotta wonder, if they make it, will that actually be it? Probably not. And so in the end, taken as one saga, what is Star Wars about? It's hard to tell at this point, and over time, it's only gonna get harder. In all this talk about the lack of endings and stories continuing until the end of time, there's a recent comic book miniseries that offers a different idea. One that initially seemed like the most cynical of corporate-mandated IP crossovers. I'm talking about Aliens vs. Avengers, a product of the Disney Corporation acquiring both Marvel and 20th Century Fox, thus owning their libraries of characters. Written by Jonathan Hickman and drawn by Esad Ribic, this comic turned out to not only not be terrible, but actually is like truly incredible. But more significantly, it also does what both the Alien movie franchise and Marvel Comics are unable to do: provide an ending. Probably like most readers, I was expecting this comic to have the most obvious lazy premise, where like a spaceship with a xenomorph on it crashes into New York and then the Avengers have to fight a bunch of aliens. But that's not it at all. As if knowing that's what we were expecting, Hickman's opening line of the book literally is, quote, "It's disappointing, isn't it? To expect one thing and instead get another entirely." So instead of that lazy premise, the series actually takes place decades in the future of the Marvel Universe, when Tony Stark is an old man in a wheelchair, the Fantastic Four have all died, and Miles Morales is in his late 40s. It's already the last days of the Marvel Universe as we know it, and then we learn that in the 1,000 years after the events of Alien Covenant, David, Michael Fassbender's sociopathic android, has been spreading the xenomorph infestation not just through the galaxy, but through the multiverse, and finally arrives in the Marvel Universe. Earth and humanity are basically wiped out in a single issue, until all that remains are a small group of survivors, with Black Panther, Wolverine, Emma Frost, Miles Morales, going through space on a spaceship. This is the end of mankind and the end of the Marvel Universe, and they are determined to bring an end to these aliens as well. It's a self-contained story that actually gives an ending to both the Marvel Universe and the world of Alien, and it's more ambitious than almost anything that's been done with either property in decades. It feels like a definitive statement on both franchises, and honestly, if this were the actual ending to both, I would be satisfied. Hickman and Ribic could have easily played the hits and been just fine, but they chose to look forward and do something new. Obviously, this is not in continuity for either regular series, it's basically like a what-if story, but it shows what can be possible even in the cynical world of corporate storytelling. Look, I realize this is an argument I can't really win. Like I mentioned earlier, film is a business, and some guy on the internet is never going to convince studio executives to stop greenlighting sequels, no matter how much my head is glowing, which we all know is a visual representation of my powerful mental processing. I am not anti-franchise, that should be clear by now. These are a part of cinema, and plenty of them rock. Like just a few minutes ago, I was raving about how I want to see like a dozen more Predator movies. In the past 20 years, it really did get exciting to see movies finally faithfully adapt multi-part stories, something we had never really seen before. But now, I think the novelty has worn off a bit. Stories are special because they're finite. They end. Let comic books be comic books, and let's let movies be movies. And also, seriously, read Aliens vs. Avengers. Like, I still can't believe how good this thing is. And I'm not getting paid to say this. It's just fucking awesome, and if at least one person reads it because of this video, I'll be happy. And speaking of endings, our next episode is our season finale. That's right, this season has gone for 2 full years, and it is finally coming to an end with the next episode. And folks, it's a big one. It is all about cinematic video games. Seriously, I will be playing video games. I bought a PlayStation 5 for this episode. It's a crossover with the great Jacob Geller, the best in the biz. It's a big holiday spectacular, and it's actually, it's out right now. Like, we already made it. It's done, and you can watch it right now on Nebula, our sponsor for this episode. Nebula is the independent creator-owned streaming platform that you hear me talk about all the time because it's also the only place where you can watch The Dinner Plan, my new movie, a 30-minute comedy thriller about the lengths a man will go to not throw up at his boss's dinner party. Starring Griffin Newman, John Hodgman, Miriam Shore, Zach Cherry, Eudora Peterson, Jeffrey Cantor, and Cindy Chung. Right now, you can get 50% off an entire year of Nebula by using my link here or scanning this QR code, which also helps support this channel. Or, if you just want to try it out to see if it's for you, you can get a 3-day free trial. So go, come on. Watch the season finale, it's awesome, you're gonna love it, and watch my movie. Show it to your family when you're visiting for the holiday. They're gonna have a great time. That's all, good night.